Hi AP Psychology students, and welcome back. Today we are continuing our discussion of the neurocommunication, and we are talking about how psychoactive drugs impact our neurons, right, and their ability to communicate with one another. So this connects with the College Board objective, explain how psychoactive drugs affect behavior and mental processes. And as you can see under the under the list of essential knowledge, they have all the different categories of drugs that you need to be aware of listed. And how we're going to get to this objective today is by answering the following questions. So first, how do drugs impact the neuron communication process? Second, how are common drugs classified based on their effects? And then third, when does drug use become abuse? So when we think about drugs in our nervous system, they can have three major impacts on the neurotransmitters in the brain. So the first one is agonist or an agonistic effect, which means that the drug increases or encourages neural firing. The second is antagonistic or an agonist, in that it discourages neural firing. This can happen through blocking synapses or preventing messaging from being sent. And then we also have this effect of drugs which can cause a reuptake, or they are categorized as a reuptake inhibitor. So this is a special mechanism where they block the reabsorption of the neurotransmitter. So they inhibit, right, that reuptake process, right? And by inhibiting the reuptake process, they increase the amount of neurotransmitters in the synapse. So this is an example of that reuptake. If you take a look here, you see that this first picture here is what happens in your brain while you're eating food. You see dopamine is released and then it's sucked back in, right, through these arrows where it shows it's going back in through that reuptake process, that vacuum. However, with a drug like cocaine, what happens is that cocaine is symbolized by these big red balls, and the balls go in and they actually block the vacuum. So then this synapse is flooded with all the dopamine and none of it gets kind of sucked back up, right? If you can kind of think of reuptake inhibitors as a form of agonist because it does kind of increase the amount of the firing in your brain, but they work a little differently. Okay, so when we think about major drugs and their categories, obviously there's a lot more drugs, psychoactive drugs than we have listed here, but these are the major categories, some common examples, and the impact they have. So stimulants, depressants, hallucinogens, and opioids. Stimulants speed up the nervous system, caffeine, cocaine, amphetamines, nicotine. Depressants slow down the nervous system, alcohol and barbiturates, sometimes called depressants, or downers. Hallucinogens give you that kind of distortion in your perception, so you can have like hallucinations or delusions or issues with your cognition. Marijuana and LSD or acid are two examples of hallucinogens, and then opioids. So opioids work to relieve pain. Common opioids are heroin, morphine, OxyContin, fentanyl is now big in the news because of all the overdoses it's causing. It's another example of an opioid. So we talk about drug use, right? And a lot of people throughout their lives will use different psychoactive drugs for a variety of reasons. Could be medicinal, could be recreational, and not all of that use necessarily is problematic. However, there is a portion of the population who their use turns into abuse and then it becomes problematic. So how do we determine when use becomes abuse? Well, when these qualifications are met, we would diagnose somebody with substance abuse disorder. So the first thing is that the substance use would have a significant life impact, right? It would cause disruptions in their life, but they still use it anyways. So what might this look like? They would have a very small amount or diminished control over their use of the drug. So they would have intense cravings, overdoses, they might be doing illegal activity to get their hands on the drug, etc. Or they might also have diminished social functioning. So they lose their job, they get a divorce, they end up losing their home, they're homeless, they fail out of school, they don't have any friends. There's a lot going on socially, but they still use the drug. Another symptom that you're looking for is tolerance. So needing more of the substance for the same effect. And the final symptom is withdrawal. So withdrawal is like those unpleasant physical or mental reactions that you have when you stop using a drug. And the idea of someone experiencing withdrawal is a symptom of that they have that substance abuse disorder. So if we're wondering kind of how much this touches our families, I have this chart here. It's a little bit old, it's from 2019, but if you take a look at the data, it's showing that across the board, 30 to 40% of families have been touched by drinking or drug use that has caused trouble, right? That has gone past use into the abuse category. So it's definitely something that a lot of people experience either, personally or through family throughout their lifetime. Okay, so specifically, we're trying to learn more about how drug use can differ between teenagers and adults. And what they find is that with teenagers, your brain, right, made up of neurons, we're talking about neurons, neuron communication, is particularly in a vulnerable state. And this is because it is pruning unneeded neurons. So think about it as like scissors kind of clipping away at a tree, pruning, shaping the brain. Then it's also solidifying neural pathways. So the pathways that you're using are getting stronger. So either you use it or you lose it. When you use it, it gets stronger. When you don't use it, you lose it, right? And then it's finishing up that myelination process. So neurons are getting their myelin, and that's protecting the speed of the axon, or speed of the message in the axon. So what research is finding, as we are continuing to get better and better kind of ability to look at the brain through imaging techniques, that what they find is that teens who start using drugs earlier are at a higher risk for developing substance abuse disorder. So the NIH, National Institute of Health, a government organization, found that using the drugs before the age of 15 leads to a higher rate of substance abuse development later in life. So much so that I have this highlighted down there that over 40% of individuals who started drinking before 15 meet the criteria for substance abuse disorder, while only 10% of those who started drinking at 21 or later. So that's a big difference. And if we start thinking about why, it's because your brain is so vulnerable during this teenage years, and that when you start utilizing drugs as a teenager, then those pathways get solidified, kind of imprinted in the brain, and it's much harder to break than when the pathways are already kind of set, and then you add in, recreational drug use. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is recovery, right? So honestly, nobody takes a drug of any kind and thinks, I want to be an addict, right? Addiction is never something that somebody wants, and addiction should not be seen as a weakness in somebody or a moral, like they aren't strong enough. It is a disorder. It's a disease, right? And what we know is that when you use drugs, those drugs have a long-lasting impact on your brain. Now, the brain's amazing, and so as this picture depicts, over time it can regrow and heal. However, that time is a long time, right? And all the way in between, people are struggling with not continuing that substance abuse. So permanent or long-lasting changes are part of the reason why relapse is such a normal part of recovery. And relapsing doesn't mean the person failed or can't do it. It's just something to expect when someone is in recovery from substance abuse disorder. All right, AP Psychology students, make sure you can answer these essential questions. And don't forget, psychology is flippin' awesome.